moving on to the AFC North, we got the Cincinnati Bengals. They've got the first overall pick in the draft. Does it all start with Joe Burrow? Is there any other potential strategy there with that first overall pick?
No. The end.
Solved. All right, so we start with Joe Burrow. We've discussed A.J. Green on the last podcast. If having him for at least one more year under the franchise tag is the right play for Burrow and his development, we don't always draft and build for just 1 year, Sam, right?
Correct.
Some people like to do that. It's a multi-year rebuild for Joe Burrow. So how important is 1 year of A.J. Green to get things kicked off for Burrow?
It's not that I think it's, make or break for Joe Burrow. It's that I don't really see an upside to letting him leave at this point. I know you get a compensatory draft pick, but ultimately it's a mid-round pick that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good anyway. Look, I think when you don't have a giant group of receivers that will make his life easier, keep around a guy that should be one of the best in the NFL when he's healthy. For 1 year, franchise tag money, you've got the space to make it happen. I just don't see the upside to letting A.J. Green walk.
So I like the idea we talked about the other day of let him come back, let Burrow feed him the ball, and then he's trade bait by week 6, right?
I don't hate that.
And then you give Burrow the rest of the year to figure out who he's throwing to. Is it Tyler Boyd long-term? Have they extracted more production out of John Ross, and he's going to be a long-term option? Have they drafted somebody? The top of the second, everybody's going to talk about Joe Burrow here. I'm fascinated by the top of the second round where the Bengals are sitting there again with the premium pick. There's going to be more good receivers on the board, more good corners on the board. So again, these value positions. And then I don't think the tackles will be on the board, but the Bengals are getting Jonah Williams back. So I think Jonah Williams coming back at left tackle should improve their team. It looks like Cordy Glenn has worn out his welcome, but could they, Josh Jones is our 5th first-round tackle out of Houston. He could be there, top of the second round. Whether it's tackle, corner, or receiver, it's got to be a premium position on the turn there.
And I think they're in a great spot for that to happen. I mean, the forecast guys mock draft had 12 receivers in the first round. Now that's probably going overboard, but most people have like 6. And whatever, so 5, 6, 7, those receivers, A, they're really good players. And B, one of those is going to be sitting there with the 33rd overall pick. You're going to essentially have a first-round receiver at the top of the second round, and that could make a massive impact to this group, enable you to potentially trade A.J. Green before the deadline, midway through the season. But either way, you're going to be adding a valuable player to Joe Burrow, give him somebody to throw to, or, as you say, get one of the top tackles and try and, shore up right tackle as well as left tackle.
Bengals Ken brings up a good point because he's got all the Bengals thoughts here. Bengals Ken says Reggie Wayne in 2012 did stick around for one more year with the Colts for Andrew Luck's rookie season, and he was like uber possession guy, high volume guy, and then after that, the wheels fell off. I think he showed up in camp for the Patriots and retired, but they stole one extra year, aided in Luck's development. It didn't matter long term for the Colts, but I like that as a concept. Do you think anybody would be interested in John Ross? Do you think the Bengals could steal a 3rd-round pick for John Ross anywhere in the open market? Like, he's flashed enough, and speed receivers are kind of at a premium, even though there's a million of them in the draft. Do you think they could steal a 3rd-round pick as a reclamation project? If they could, I would flip them. If not, I would try to reclaim them myself.
You try to reclaim them yourself. There's been so little, so little glimpses of what should be for a guy with 4.22 speed.
I know.
That it seems really hard to imagine a team giving an awful lot to acquire him. He has 716 career yards in 3 seasons. Now, I mean, huge amount of that is missing all that time, but
it's a longer learning curve, slower learning curve for receivers. I'm just intrigued by it. It shows, I think, how tough it is for Deshaun Jackson to become a legitimate 10-year deep threat.
Yeah. And
how Will Fuller, comes in, and when he is healthy, is a game changer for the Texans. It shows how difficult it is. It's way more than just running 4-2, 4-3. Those guys are skilled all around, Tyreek Hill and all that stuff. But I'm fascinated by the receiving core going forward for Burrow. Offensive line strategy, if they did, you have Jonah come back and did draft Josh Jones top of the second, you don't have to have Bobby Hart out there at right tackle. I know they locked him up. And that's,
thank God.
If they're just not, they're going to pay him over $6 million this year. If they're not tied to that contract and they're able to move on, they'll be able to to rebuild that line a little bit quicker. Then they have to figure out the interior. I start with the tackles and then work my way to the interior, which is also a disaster. So
I mean, part of fixing the Bengals would be stop making moves like signing Bobby Hart to a large contract extension. Like if we could all agree this offseason to not make any more of those ridiculous signings, that would be ideal.
Anywhere they should go in free agency, they've got a little over $9 million as of today in cap. No, I'm looking at the wrong. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong numbers.
No, they got like 49 million.
Sorry, 44. I actually
45.
accidentally clicked on 2016. I'm like, what? So they're middle of the pack as far as free agent money goes. Is this another one of those, like, let's slow play it until we build from within?
No, I think they can definitely, I think, should be looking at creeping back toward average in the interior of the offensive line, right? So maybe try and fix your other tackle spot in the draft. That should, in theory, give you 2 decent bookends. Now let's start, or not now, but you should also start trying to replace the absolute weak links in the middle of your offensive line for guys that are at least viable.
You know who would be a really good fit for them is Joe Thuney.
Joe Thuney.
As far as his skill set, zone blocking scheme, he could do that pretty well.
I wouldn't hate that at all. I think you can target some guys that are just viable, though, on the interior, right? Without going crazy with your free agent spending. Sort of keep the war chest in place, but get guys that are just sort of halfway decent interior players.
That's what the Bills did last year, bring in like a Quentin Spain, Mitch Morse, Ty Nsekhe, and it's like, it didn't all work, but you're taking a lot of shots and hoping to find 1 or 2 players out of that mix.
Yeah, so like, a Ron O'Leary or a Stefan Wisniewski or somebody that's not necessarily a long-term option, but a guy that you can go out there, start in the interior, and they'll be okay.
I like
which
it.
is a dramatic upgrade over terrible.
All right, Bengals, fixed-ish. Let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They don't have a ton of cap space. They have a decision to make on Bud Dupree.
Well, I can give you that one for a start.
Give us the decision on Bud.
Let him walk.
Let him walk?
Yeah, save the money.
Save your money. You still have to find a complement on the other side of TJ Watt.
That's what the draft's for.
Okay. I would say, I'll keep going back to the pass game because that's where things are going to be won and lost. What about a number 1 receiver? I don't think they have the ability to get one. How comfortable are you with this receiving core? Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, and James Washington. Like, on paper, I feel like the range of outcomes is wide.
Yes.
In a vacuum, it's like, here's Juju. I don't know if he's a true number 1, so to speak. I don't trust him in every situation. I'd rather have somebody better than him. But if he had to be the guy, Deontay Johnson can get open, James Washington, a deep threat. Like, they've got the skill sets you want. I just kind of wish that there was another guy in that mix.
Yeah, so I like collectively the talent of that group, that trio in particular. I think I wouldn't hate the idea of adding one in the draft. I wouldn't go out of my way to make it happen. Like if value fell and I liked the receiver, I would take him, but I wouldn't be, going, we've got to come out of this first round with a wide receiver, otherwise everything's broken. I think you've got to look at what was throwing to those guys last year. The combination of Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges was abysmal. So the trio that showed up last year should not be the trio that shows up with a healthy, good quarterback. Now, the other concern is Ben Roethlisberger is old, kind of fat, and looks like Matt Patricia right now. Do you want that guy leading your offense in 2020 and beyond? And even if you do...
Well, in 2020, yeah, but
how much
I think
has he
beyond.
got left?
I think 2020, you have to. I mean,
So just look at that draft class now, right? Eli Manning, done and retired. Phillip Rivers, broken down, hitting free agency, and his own team doesn't want him anymore.
I don't think he's broken down.
He's kind of broken down.
He's regressed to the same points he's been at other points in his career.
Right, only this time his arm is kind of like a noodle.
His arm has been a noodle for about 6 years now.
But it's more of a noodle now than it was.
I don't know.
And now you got Ben Roethlisberger, who, as I
Yeah.
say, is like in photographs out there looking like Matt Patricia. Like that group, the 2004 draft class, is kind of done. So where is your succession plan? Because it isn't Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, and Paxton Lynch.
So are they the team with no money? Are they the team that brings in a Marcus Mariota as the backup? Like, they're just not in a great spot financially or as far as draft. They gave up a lot of draft capital. Here's when we go back to the Devin Bush trade. They gave up a lot of draft capital to go get Devin Bush. And at the time we said, it felt like this, like, here's this big need that we have, and we're going to go get it. But it's like Devin Bush moving up.
Yeah, now they have 1 second-round pick in the first 2 days.
Yeah, like to go from 20 to 10, as they did last year, it's like Devin Bush has to be worth 2 players. He's never going to be.
Which as a linebacker is almost impossible.
Right. He's never going to be. And then you sit there a year from now and it's like, okay, we just gave up. They don't have a first round pick now because they traded that for Minkah Fitzpatrick, which is fine if you're like, oh, we got our first round pick a year early. Well, he's also 2 years closer to free agency and he's a safety. He's a good player. He fit in the system pretty well. But then when you get to this snapshot of the offseason and it's like, we could use another receiver. The O-line is going to need some help soon. Our edge rusher, Bud Dupree's about to walk. We got to replace him, and we don't have a first-round pick. And corner has always been a situation where, okay, Steven Nelson was fine. Joe Hayden's getting older. Mike Hilton's. You need more depth there as well. There's a lot of needs here for the Steelers, and they spent a lot of draft capital on Devin Bush and Minkah Fitzpatrick.
And they don't have a huge amount of money to play with in free agency. So, yeah, the Steelers, honestly, are in a similar situation to the Minnesota Vikings in terms of they kind of need to nail this offseason in order for them not to struggle in 2020. Only, unlike the Vikings, like they don't have any draft picks. So the Vikings need to like nail on a couple of picks where they've been struggling. You know, they need to actually sort of hit on some draft evals. The Steelers don't even have, like, they don't have the picks to nail. They've got 1 second-round pick, and that basically needs to answer 3 or 4 different problems in one, which seems like a stretch.
Yeah, and then when you look at so if you just look at their cap numbers for this year, you have Ben Roethlisberger, over $33 million. You have Stephon Tuitt, over $14 million. David DeCastro, over $13 million. And Cameron Hayward, over $13 million. Just looking at that from aging quarterback, who's still probably worth that. Big Ben is worth that. Like, that's worth the risk.
Well, we hope. Otherwise, everything is knackered.
Of course. But Tuitt and Hayward, who are both really good players, but they're interior defensive linemen. And David DeCastro, he's a guard. I mean, it is, from a positional value standpoint, that's a lot of money. Then you go down the list. Joe Hayden, aging corner. Marquise Pouncey, center. Steven Nelson at corner. Like, so a lot of their of their assets are locked up in interior offensive linemen and interior defensive linemen, which is why we're sitting here saying, man, some upgrades at corner, some upgrades at receiver, and some youth at tackle would really help this team. And then just figuring out the succession plan at quarterback.
So I would absolutely try and look at a guy like Marcus Mariota, right? Not even necessarily him. But
I don't know how you even afford any of that.
One of these guys is going to end up having to take backup quarterback money because there's
still a lot.
Fewer QBs than jobs in this offseason. And honestly, that's why I'm saying it's not necessarily Marcus Mariota. It's whoever is the guy left standing when the musical chairs stop and everybody else sits down on one and you're like, oh, crap, there's no teams left. I have to take a backup job somewhere. Whoever that ends up being, whether it's Mariota, whether it's Jameis, whether it's Teddy, whatever quarterback is left standing, the Steelers should be trying to bring him in for a cheap backup quarterback deal. Because if Roethlisberger, A, can't go, if he breaks down again, or if he gets hurt or whatever, or B, is really bad, you need that other option. Because if you have to roll all through the season with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph again, you might as well just pack up and go home. And then B, the next thing that they should be doing is they should be attacking your list of reclamation projects at corner. So there's a bunch of guys that are going to go for very cheap money because they've been proven to not be all that good, but have talent. So a guy like a Ronald Darby, right? Can you get him in, even if it's a 1 year, $6 million kind of deal,
yeah.
Right? Your cornerback situation is not great, and there are talented players out there that you could. They might.
The problem with Darby is he just becomes redundant to what they have in Hayden and Steven Nelson.
Well, he becomes redundant, or he gives them another option, right?
Like
maybe Darby comes in, you get the top level play that you saw at the end, and it coincides with a step back from Joe Hayden as he ages, or Steven Nelson not playing as well, whatever. It gives you other options to
hedge your bets at valuable
forward.
positions, essentially.
Yes.
At corner. Well, the Steelers, I think the offseason strategy, trade down as much as you possibly can.
With that 1 second round pick.
With the 1 second round pick. You got to accumulate assets as much as possible. All right, moving on. Who's my next team? Baltimore Ravens. How do we fix the team that had the best record in the NFL? I think the first thing they need to figure out is Matt Judon being a free agent, guy that we've talked about quite a bit here. They've constructed the free pressure pretty well, schemed it up. They don't have a ton of cap space relative to the rest of the league, but enough to play around with. Do they bring back Judon on the franchise tag, let him walk, pick up a compensatory pick potentially, and then get the next guy? I think that's the first question of the Ravens offseason.
I would be perfectly prepared to let Matt Judon walk. They did it a year ago in terms of Zadarius Smith. I don't see a massive downside to letting him walk out the door, getting the compensatory pick in the future, and being able to attack that position in the draft. I think they could do that, not suffer any kind of downturn in production because of how dependent it was on them being the most blitz-happy team in the NFL in terms of by alignment scheming him up against tight ends a ton. I think they can generate that pressure elsewhere.
The place where the Ravens have followed the PFF way, so to speak, is building back to front, right? So they let, as you said, Zadarius Smith, C.J. Mosley, Terrell Suggs, they let the valuable front seven players walk last year in order to go and sign Earl Thomas and make an even bigger strength in the secondary. Is the secondary a place where strategically you just continue to add more and more? I mean, I know it is, but Marlon Humphrey's about to get paid, right? Brandon Carr, Jimmy Smith back there is now a free agent. Marcus Peters is back there, who they traded for in the middle of the season. Do we just continue to throw assets there, late first round?
So that's the issue, is that at some point that collection becomes really expensive. I think it's the right way of doing it in terms of you can essentially create this incredible group of cornerbacks that make it really challenging for any opposing passing game to function. You then augment that with the most blitz-happy, defensive scheme in the NFL. Now you're causing real problems for opposing passing attacks because A, they're already being challenged by the coverage, and B, there's going to be pressure because you're getting blitzed all the time, and blitz just generates more pressure. The reason most teams don't do it just more than everybody else, or more than they do now, is because it stresses a back end. Those guys have to be able to hold up. If you know they can, and that's already a problem, then it's a great defensive strategy regardless of who the players are. So the problem with that team building strategy of let's just throw all the assets at the backs, at the back four, the secondary, the back five, is at some point, I think those guys are all going to get paid Stephon Gilmore money, and that breaks your salary cap.
So that's why I'm wondering.
You got to get cheaper when you can,
right,
is what I'm saying.
So that's where, again, when people mock draft, right, they're like, okay, let's look at the Ravens. They got a really nice roster. The O-line's looking good. They drafted a first-round wide receiver last year. You got Lamar Jackson. They're set everywhere. Okay, they need an edge. Matthew Judon's going to leave. Let's draft an edge. Mm-hmm. But should they be all in on the next corner? Because Marlon Humphrey's about to hit his fifth-year option in 2021. And then, like you said, he could be a $20 million a year corner under the new salary cap, right? And do you just want to put yourself in position where you're comfortable with those guys walking? Or who cares? Even if it's not Marlon Humphrey, it's like, how long is Marcus Peters going to last here? How long is Brandon Carr going to last? And we've got Jimmy Smith walking as it is in his 30s and banged up. So is this like, man, stick to the strategy that got you here, build that secondary. Plus, Earl Thomas is getting older, too. I mean, it's just continue to add in that, the back four, five.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's a massive glaring need or anything, but I think if you want this to be a sustainable enterprise, right, as opposed to we're building for next year and nothing else, then you need to think about the secondary because they're old and they're expensive. And if you can get younger and cheaper and not drop off in production, then hell yeah, do that. Even if it's not a need, you're not drafting for 2020. I think that's the mistake a lot of people make is we draft for this year and nothing else. And that's how you end up having people say Chase Young should be the number one overall pick.
Well, that's what fans definitely do. And then, some in the media focus just on what did I just see and what do I do for this year?
So we're not building for 2020. We're building for the next however many years. And if you're doing that, you need to think about the next few years of this secondary, which gets hard to keep together because they're old and expensive.
So Ravens have some foresight in the secondary.
God, don't draft a running back.
All of their linebackers are
at the top,
free agents here.
Yes.
And then I think that's where they, my boy Nick Kwiatkowski, if they're going to go bargain basement linebacker, nice little 2-down run stopper and good blitzer, good flipper when he blitzes, right? Flipper guy. So find the bargain linebackers. Don't have to go find the next C.J. Mosley.
David Mayo.
I wouldn't hate a franchise tag on Judon, but I'm fascinated by the idea of could you get the next guy up there and just develop him and scheme it up, right? And then I wonder at wide receiver if they need to start mitigating the idea that in past first games, they need guys that can get open a little bit more and make life easier on Lamar Jackson so they don't have to be so dependent on game flow and a rushing attack setting things up.
I mean, I think wide receiver across the board is a place where I don't know that any team can ever be wrong by snagging a wide receiver, right? Now, don't make it your number one overall priority for every team. But if any team drafting a receiver in the third round is not going to be wrong, right? Because you should always have extra wide receivers coming in. The game is just too important from a passing point of view. Having said that, if there's a team out there that I don't think needs to go crazy for wide receivers, it's the Ravens and to an extent the 49ers, because their passing attacks function in different ways than most teams. They have a lot of receivers already. They're just a tight end.
Right.
And they have that running game. They don't need to go crazy. We saw how much of a difference Marquise Brown made, the deep threat that can scare teams and change the game, even when the ball's not going in his direction. Sure, they could use a second guy that, is maybe an upgrade over a Willie Snead or a Miles Boykin, but I don't go crazy for it,
Fair points. We've got the Ravens solved as well. They're going to go 16-0 next year because of that. All right, moving on to the Cleveland Browns. I'm going to just piggyback on what I said the other day. I think if their offseason starts with a Jason Peters signing and, say, Andrew Thomas getting drafted, it could be Andrew Thomas, it could be Tristan Wirfs, it could be Jedrick Wills at number 12 overall, I think you are instantly taking a bottom 10 offensive line. They were actually 11th worst maybe last year by our rankings. I think they're instantly in the top 15 and also looking for short-term and long-term fixes. Peters and Thomas say I think it's this best case scenario to at least kick off the offseason for the Brownies.
They're really interesting because their entire strategy went from, okay, we've nailed our quarterback. We finally got him. The jersey can stop ticking to the next guy. Now let's surround this guy with a team, right? Let's build an offense. Let's build a whole roster around this guy so that we can actually become good. And we're now the division favorites and we can go on a Super Bowl run and everything's going great, right? To, oh my God, the building is on fire. Quick, let's put it out. Let's get rid of the problem. Let's bring in Stefanski. Let's get a new GM. So they've gone from like, everything's great, let's roster build, to let's stop the bleeding in this offseason, right? So I think job number one is to do that. It's to, okay, we went from thinking Baker Mayfield was awesome to, I don't even know if he's the guy anymore. So let's eliminate all the other variables, right? And one of those variables is we had Greg Robinson at left tackle, and right tackle wasn't great either. So if they do not sign a Jason Peters or an Andrew Whitworth or a trade for Trent Williams, something is broken. Now, I'm not saying that's the only fix, but job one should be let's get solid at left tackle immediately and forget about everything else.
Well, especially the way Baker played, right? We know that the weaknesses at tackle made him play in a more skittish manner than we had seen from him previously, and the way that we had only seen him a little bit in Oklahoma. So,
well, yeah, so the real problem is that we don't know that was doing it, but what we do know is that that's one of two possible explanations, right? Either Baker Mayfield inherently started to lean into all of his negatives and just start playing worse, or the bad, and that made the offensive line look worse, or the bad play at offensive tackle caused Baker Mayfield to start magnifying his negatives, and the whole thing spiraled. You know what I mean? But either way, you need to make that a one option answer, right? Let's eliminate the possibility that tackle is at fault here, and let's focus on Baker Mayfield.
All right, let's talk hypothetically here. We talked about the Patriots, right? Number 23, you would trade it for Odell Beckham. If you're the Browns, would you trade Odell Beckham for number 23? And then you could grab an Andrew Thomas at 12, and then at 23 with this wide receiver talent, you get T. Higgins, you get Jalen Reagor, you get the next wide receiver. And have you seen enough of Odell Beckham paired with Baker Mayfield to give up on that combination yet?
No.
Or would you rather get the next guy?
Here's the thing. If I was moving Odell Beckham, it would be because the sheer volume of, let's call them strong personalities in Cleveland last year was a mess, right? Now, I don't know where you put the blame with that, right? Was Freddie Kitchens a strong enough head coach to deal with all that and put it all together, right? Or is it just there's too much strength in terms of will and all that kind of stuff to pull in the same direction and function? Can it function that way? Now, I know Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham were teammates together in college, so we've seen it can kind of work. But one, that was without a Baker Mayfield in there as well. Two, they were both, young and in college. Like, people change. They're both now multimillionaires and powerful personalities and players at the NFL level. They're not the same as they were when they were functioning perfectly harmoniously in college. So I would be asking myself if I think that combination can function. If I don't think it can, if I'm the Browns, the guy I'm trying to get rid of is Jarvis Landry, because I think the talent in Odell Beckham is just too much to get rid of, right? I don't see enough from Jarvis Landry to make me go, okay, that's worth the pain in the ass. I see enough in terms of upside in Odell Beckham to make me think, okay, that's worth the headache, right? I can roll with that and try and make that work.
The way I usually look at rosters here, notice we haven't even mentioned a running back once as far as the rebuilds, but I look at rosters and I say, what kind of depth do you have at corner, quarterback, and then depth at corner, receiver, and then what is the O-line looking like, right? Last year, we were looking at this receiving core. It's like they brought in OBJ. You pair him with Landry, the possession guy. Rashard Higgins is a beautiful number 3. And even like a Tywan Taylor, who they bring in as like that random like 10 to 15 snap deep threat. It's like that is how I would build a wide receiver core, because it has the elements. A receiving core, I think, needs the elements to challenge the defense in every which way. On paper this year, though, the same group just looks... Rashard Higgins is a free agent. Odell Beckham was not on the same page as Baker the entire time.
Right.
Jarvis Landry is merely a complementary piece in that whole equation. Is that the place that they just might need an entire overhaul and find guys that are going to fit with what Baker's trying to do? Throwing the ball up the seam, give me some big-bodied guys that are going to go up and catch some of his tight window lasers that he is known for, that kind of separated him from some of the other quarterbacks we thought in that class a couple years ago.
I think they should be drafting receivers whatever, because, again, it's a cost thing, right? If you can get cheaper at the same position, why not do it? But I want to be in the same spot as tackle in terms of eliminating variables, right? And if you completely overhaul that group, you ship off Odell Beckham, you're left with Jarvis Landry, a rookie. Kaderil Hodge was the guy that was emerging late last season, has taken all Rashad Higgins' snaps and targets. Like, if that's your group, do you know what that should be producing from a quarterback point of view? Because I don't. Like, the rookie might suck. He might be N'Keal Harry in year one. Or he might be like, you know what I mean? You're adding more variables to a problem you don't want to add variables to, which is we do not know anymore if Baker Mayfield is the future quarterback for the Browns. We need to make sure that the question we're answering is determined entirely by Baker Mayfield. It's not a mitigating circumstances with the receiver. It's not mitigating circumstances on the offensive line. It's we have patched those up. Those are viable. Now what does Baker Mayfield have?
So fix Baker. I'd fix the tackle situation. I think the other big question, I love the way their corners are. You always add there, but Joe Schobert bringing him back, probably not at that $10 million plus price tag, right?
Correct. I think you've got to look at, the draft, try and find yourself a coverage linebacker somewhere in the mid-rounds.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.